This is the first time I've told anybody this outside of a skiff. And it's an honor to do it in front of fellow veterans. My name is Robert Bird. I was born in Valparaiso, Indiana, northwest Indiana, just where Lake Michigan takes a bite out of Indiana's upper left side. And I lifeguarded on Lake Michigan too. Went into the Indiana University and was in ROTC, Air Force. I stayed in ROTC for all 4 years. And when I began my senior year, I walked in and I found out I was a cadet colonel. So the 20 bucks I gave my boss worked. He was a professor of aerospace science. He was a retired colonel. He was a Southern gentleman from Virginia, really fine man. And the first thing he did was call me in and he said, I don't know why this happens to people like you, Mr. Bird. So I'm thinking of the hundreds of things that I didn't want my mom to know. He said, you've been medically disqualified from the program. I said, for what? He said, your eyes are 0.25 diopters too much. He said, now if you'll keep coming to class, I'll have you re-examined over at Wright-Patterson. I said, okay. So I got re-examined, came back, and I was good. Years later, I figured out what happened. He called the ophthalmologist, said, here's what you're going to find. And I graduated, and they told me if I'm not a pilot or a navigator, I have to be a missile officer or a weatherman. Well, clearly, I failed in being an astronaut. Bad eyesight and fear of flying. But I kept putting down Air Force Office of Special Investigations. It's kind of like the Marine Corps CID, Army CID, and MI combined. We do background checks, criminal cases, counter-espionage, counterintelligence. And my degrees from Indiana, I had 2 degrees, double major, law enforcement and sociology, criminology, that kind of stuff.
Sorry.
It's okay.
I went off with your advance.
I was going to just make up the rest of it. So I actually got it. And my first assignment was to St. Louis. Then I went to Okinawa, then came back to Pittsburgh. And halfway through Pittsburgh, the Defense Investigative Service started. So I took over and became the head of the Defense Investigative Service there. They do strictly background checks, but it helped me later on. The next thing I was assigned to was Washington, D.C., where our headquarters was. And they had the Air Force OSI Academy there. And I became the business manager and an instructor. For years, I've taught interviewing and interrogation. I've also taught other courses. One of my students was an advanced one, and I encouraged her to get out of OSI. We were a male chauvinistic group. Go join the FBI because they're hiring women in bigger numbers. She did, and years later, I saw her on television. She was the #2 agent that caught the Unabomber. So I contacted her and said, you owe everything to me, don't you? And I said, look, all I did was acted like a little pilot boat pushing you in the right direction. You did the rest. She went to the FBI, got her PhD in behavioral psychology, and helped form the behavioral unit there. And she now was retired from the FBI and starting her own company. She said, well, I know you did give me the right move, and I also remember how to handcuff somebody. She was handcuffing me, and I was bouncing around, and finally she kept saying, no, you're going to have to stand still. I turned around and said something I wouldn't say in front of this group. F you. And I said it really good. She said, on that wall. That's it. She finally got it. So then I was in D.C., and then partway through, I love teaching. But they said, they tried to get me to go to 2 other assignments. That would have required me to move my family. I didn't want to do it. So the last time they came and got me, I said, I better shut up and do it. You're going to the Pentagon. You're going to travel a lot and make a lot of decisions. But I don't think they had any idea what they were sending me into. I went to the Pentagon, reported to the new head of the Air Force Special Projects Office. They handled a bunch of Cobra cases, a bunch of senior cases, the U-2, the SR-71, They had to work with NRO, and I couldn't say NRO out in public back then, but they have stuff to do with the satellites. Everybody knows that now. So it's all kinds of classified stuff. The front door was a safe. I had to learn how to open it every day. And inside was open storage, top secret. I throw it on the floor, leave it there. But closed storage for special access. And this is one of the things I worked on. The Lockheed SR-71. If you were in Los Angeles and you wanted to get to DC for lunch, you could leave at 11 o'clock.
Wow.
They made the trip in 59 minutes. 0.7 miles a second. And you don't do it with the canopy open. I did that once. You see what happened. Okay. But there were other airplanes too, the A-12. A predecessor to this one who was faster and could fly higher. And I'm not sure you want to fly faster or higher, but it did. But it was too expensive to maintain. This was cheaper and worked better. The next one is the U-2.
Mr. Bird,
Yes,
could I say something?
yes, sir.
If you ever want to see the SR-71 and you're in Dulles International Airport, the Udgar Hazy Air and Space Museum there has one on display. As a matter of fact, as you walk in the front door, you're looking right at it.
And
It's
on,
really cool.
on holidays, they will fly it through there. So you can see that. I just made that part up.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I didn't know that.
Thank you, I appreciate it. I don't care if you interrupt me for anything, okay? That was a good one. Yes, sir.
There's also a SR-7, the Cosmos in, it's in the front door. I always wanted to touch one. I got to touch it.
People aren't allowed to touch it very much. If you take a pencil and mark it, that'll cause it to start to burn. On the SR, they have the vertical stabilizers, the big ones in the back. The thing that holds them in is about the size of a pencil. It flies so perfectly, but on the ground, it has all these big aluminum pans. It drips all over the place. When it gets to altitude, the seals tighten. Kelly Johnson didn't care what it looked like on the ground. He just wanted to try to fly it correctly. Okay, the U-2, Dragon Lady. It would go up about 70 to 85,000 feet, fly about 3/4 of the speed of sound. But somebody in this that we love in this building caused that to be built. He also caused all the new highways to be built so that we could move our military stuff. He also said, take pictures of the death camps in Germany, because someday people won't remember. And who is that?
I know.
Bet. He went to the CIA and said, I need to know what's going on in Russia. Get something so I can figure that out. So the CIA went to the Skunk Works. And I'll tell you about them. And once they were given an idea of what they wanted, Kelly Johnson said, I'm going to take a glider, put a big engine on it, and we're going to fly really high, take great pictures. And Ike said, yeah, do it. After he said do it, the plane flew 9 months later. It normally takes 9 years. But those are different ones. I had, I can't remember, Francis Gary Powers. I had his file in my office because I had the U-2s. The wings kept getting longer and longer. And at the end of the wings, when it's sitting on the ground, it's got things that fit at the end of the wings, because if the wing tips down, it'll spin the airplane. And as it takes off, those fall off, excuse me. And when it lands, two guys have to run up and shove it on there real quick. Because the only wheels that has are two right underneath the plane and one back by the tail. It'll take off in, how many pilots do we have? Takes off in 220 feet. That's not much. And then it goes like this, and it does spirals until it gets up to 50 or so thousand. So if it has problems, it goes right down to the runway. And then once it's up there and it's working, then they take off and do their thing. But a regular commercial has a liftover drag of 12 to 1. That one is 22 to 1. It doesn't want to come down. They lose power. It takes an hour for them to force that thing back to the earth. Great, great airplane. I got to an orientation course on that one, and I also got to fly the simulator for the SR-71. The people in there are all by themselves. The navigator never flies. He just prepares the mission. And they wear these soft ascots. They're alone, unarmed, and afraid. The SR-71 guys have bright ascots. They know they fly near the edge of space, and they're flying like plus 2,000 miles. They're something else. I happened to be in uniform that day because I'd hurt my leg. I thought I ought to wear my uniform, no wings, leg in a cast. So when I went up to fly the simulator, the guy stops me and says, "This ought to be good." Just like that. So I did a Himmelman. And that in the simulator, they have cracked helmets in there. And that's when I decided I didn't want to fly the actual SR-71 because I couldn't do it. And then that night I put drugs in that guy's car. So got even with him. Okay, Lockheed Skunk Works. It started with, there was an article about comic strip. I'm trying to think of what it was back in the 40s. The guy would ride around in a cart with an outhouse behind him. Little Abner. And somebody in Little Abner built a still, and it smelled bad. So he called it the Skunk Works. Well, Lockheed Aircraft had a separate building or tent where they did experimental work. And they had smells in there that were not good, so they called it the Skunk Works. Well, after a while, it reverted to Skunk Works. And the Skunk Works is still around. And the Skunk Works is where they do all the magic stuff. So early stealth, U-2, A-12, which was faster, SR-71, and a test pilot for the Skunk Works found a dry lake bed out in Area 51. Out there, they blow up atom bombs. And they got that whole area gridded off to areas. And there's a dry lake in Area 51. So CIA came in and built Area 51. Been there many times. I'm allowed to tell you I've been in between Area 50 and 52, but I can't say where. And eventually I owned it. All of the stuff that those planes flew and did were secret and top secret. There's only confidential, secret, and top secret. Those are the only clearances. Everybody says, I got one higher than that. Special access. It's different. You'll have a top secret, and then I have to decide that I want you to do a particular job. Then I brief you special access. The clearance is a way to get to the door. The other thing is how to do it. Kelly Johnson, genius. He was the head of Lockheed Aircraft and Skunk Works. He, in his mind, figured out how to make all these things spectacular. And he did something called streamline management, which is what we adopted in the Air Force with him. My mouth is dry. I got to give up meth. Streamline management meant, tell me what you want. Tell me what it's supposed to do. Give me a budget. Tell me when you want it. Get the hell out of my way. All right. Streamline management. And the people in our office took big advantage of that. Air Force Special Projects is an office in the Pentagon. That's the one they sent me to. It's handled all those other airplanes. And this will show you how it's going to end up there. That's Blue. That was the predecessor to the F-117. It was a demonstrator to show that it might be invisible or close to invisible. But when the pilots came to fly those things, actually the F-117, they had them standing in front of the hangar door at dusk, and then they opened the back, then they opened the front, and there's an F-117. And if you've never seen it, something like that, they say, that doesn't fly, does it? I mean, it didn't look like anything. But it wasn't designed to fly good. It was designed to be invisible. And if it lost power, it would go down like a leaf, and it was hard to fly. One of my best friends ended up, he'd flown, his name is Brigadier General Bond, and when he was a 3-star, he came to the War College and lectured. And I said, what are you doing this weekend? He said, I'm going to the ranch, Area 51. He'd flown every little jet fighter. I got it. And I need something with an umbrella in it, though. They said, he said he was going out there. Well, I figured he was now a 3-star general. And I said, how's your back doing? He said, I got surgery, it's fine. Well, he was going out to fly the last plane he had never flown, the F-117. It's not the type of plane I would have let him get in. It's not an easy plane to fly. And he went down. But I don't know if that's the best way for he was a fighter pilot. Very sad. I used to go to his house on Saturdays. He was a great guy. That's another version of it, early version, blue. Okay, Dennis Overholser. This is now 20 years after the early planes, around the mid-1970s. Dennis Overholser was a genius engineer. He was reading a mathematics book in Russian. And it was a guy who was looking at the angles of shooting something at a faceted flat surface and where it would angle out. And it was interesting, but he had no purpose in it. He didn't know anything good to come of it. Dennis did. He said, what if all the things from the radar hit this airplane and flew off somewhere else instead of back to the radar? What would be left? What would be left, folks? Nothing. That's why I like veterans. But he wasn't sure if they could actually do it that well. Ben Rich was vice president of the Skunk Works. And he eventually was close to taking over it because Kelly Johnson was getting some problems with his memory, some severe problems. And I met him one time, and it was an honor. But he finally had to retire for medical reasons, so Ben took over. So he showed that to Ben, and Ben said, damn, that's going to change everything, and we are going to make a lot of money. And Ben took it to William Perry. Dr. Perry was the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Development. He's one of the finest men I've ever met in my life. I'm going to run into a lot of these, I'll tell you, are like that. So he got it from Ben Rich, and then Dr. Perry took the lead in Washington, D.C., the Pentagon, the White House, Congress, to move this forward as quietly as he could. Meanwhile, a new guy came back to the Air Force Special Projects Office, Tom Jones, a colonel. He'd been there before, worked at lower levels on the SR and the U-2. But now he came back as the head of the office, the chief. Well, the first thing you do is you call anybody important that you know and say, hey, guess what? I'm big shot now too. So he called Ben Rich, who now was going to become president. And he said, hey, I'm in charge of special projects. He said, really? I got something you ought to have in your office. And the fact that we're friends would make it a wonderful arrangement. Something I fixed later on because it turned out to be too good of an arrangement. So those two got together, and he said, I understand that this General Slay, who is the general in front of Systems Command, also worked with Dr. Perry, and he picked out Brigadier General Bobby Bond, fighter pilot, to head up a small group of people to run that new project. So the head of Colonel Jones at Special Projects already had a logistics guy. They had experience in that office with classified and special access programs. So he convinced General Bond that his little team of 4 people should come in that office, and that he would sit and help them. So he did. The only thing he didn't have was a security guy. So he called over to OSI and said, what do you got cheap I can have quick? Bird. So I was told I was head of the training academy. I loved that. But I turned down 2 assignments, and this time they offered me one. I said, I better take it. So I got over to the Pentagon, and I said, well, what's my job? Hide invisible airplane. He said, what have you been smoking? But he looked serious. he said, you're also going to be in charge of security for this office. You got to get a bunch of tickets, clearances, and access. I got those pretty quick. And so now I was there. So then Bond came in. But in the meantime, Dr. Perry had two guys that were hotshots, Ken Staten and Joe Ralston. Everybody knew that these guys would be general officers. They reported to him. He put them in a room, and he said, as of now, nobody knows where you're at. You're not on anybody's personnel list. Nobody knows. And you keep it that way. You don't tell anybody where you work. You just do administrative work in the Pentagon. He told them about the technology as much as he could. He said, now I want you to stay in here until you come up with a solution. Are we going to use it now? Or are we going to hold off until maybe somebody else starts to say, I have a new technology? And if we use it now, what are we going to use it for? A bomber, fighter, reconnaissance? Well, these guys are fighter pilots. They're not going to put it on a choo-choo train. So anyhow, they came back with him. They said, well, we're scared to hold off because somebody may break into this and get that technology. So let's do it now and hope that we can go ahead and keep it secret for a while. So that was his decision too. And then as far as what they were going to put it on, they were going to put it on something fighter size that could be used like reconnaissance, no big thing, but would have a bomb bay. And I was in the room when they decided it would be a bomb bay big enough for an atomic bomb, in case they needed it. So now, these guys started to come over into my office. I briefed them, put them in there. So we had security, 2 program managers, a logistics guy, and General Bond, who didn't come in our office that much. It was just the 4 of us. And we ran that program, which normally takes 100 to 200 people. We were able to keep it quieter. In the meantime, back there, I was learning how to write a security program. I never wrote one of those. And there were I had 12 of them already in the office. Some were Cobra, dealing with the Berlin corridor and communication security. And I had a bunch of senior programs, the U2, the SR, and the tag board, a D-21 drone. It was a pretty big drone, but they put it on top of an SR, flew it and went to a dive and then launched this thing off and it would go faster. Never worked, but it was kind of cool. How many of you ever been to White Fence Chicken Ranch? Okay, it's closed now. But in there they have dinners, they have things for kids to do, and they have things in the wall where you can buy little toys. I found an SR-71 with the tag board on it as a toy made in China. 2 big secrets. And I sent it in, as I was gone from special projects a long time, sent it to them. I said, oh, secret's out. But I'll get back to those guys. We eventually caught people. So I started to make all my stuff, and I asked my boss, I said, do you remember anybody from the CIA that is real good with security? I don't know beans about what I'm doing, but I'd like to get some advice. He said, yeah, Bill Sampy. He was trained by the original dinosaurs that formed the CIA, and he helped build Area 51. He did U-2, A-12, SR-71, and he arranged for him to come over and meet me. He said his nickname is Godfather. Nothing to do with pizza. He fixed things. I leave it to your imagination. I never asked him what all he did. I respected that. So he came over and he adopted me. We got along famously. And I didn't tell him about the new technology. I just stayed with the old stuff. And I said, how am I doing? And he said, doing good. And he kept giving me advice, telling me about the Skunk Works because he knew them backwards and forwards. He said, we provided all their security. I'll get to this later. When they started to leave and let the Air Force have all these programs, that stuff went away. But they still thought they were hot stuff, but they weren't. You'll see. So I worked with the Godfather, and meanwhile I was doing each case, and I was just doing common sense, improving it, making things better if I could. I got to the last one, and the last one was a little bitty program with only about 50 people in it, and it was disappearing quickly. And I looked at that and I said, what if I call the new program the same as I called that one? 2 programs, 1 name. Because when the Russians or somebody get information, and I always knew they would, we can't be perfect. They're going to take something they found and say, oh, it belongs over here. And they're going to take a square peg and put it in a round hole, and it's not going to work. I thought I was genius. But later on, I talked to one of my new guys, Admiral Inman at NSA, and when I got to be friends with him, I'll tell you why. I told him about it, and he looked at me and he said, nobody's ever done that. And I said, I don't care. Is it stupid? He smiled and he liked it. Okay. When the project got going, we'd hoped to keep it quiet for 3 years. I said, I'll be lucky if I keep it quiet till Christmas. You know, because keeping something that big, that quiet, it was the biggest secret since the Manhattan Project. Not volume, but as far as the impact on our ability to take over as a lead for the country, for the world. We ended up, we got 10 to 11 years. And I got the credit for some of the stuff when we started doing it all, but it was mostly the people that were briefed all kept their words, which is unusual. We weren't supposed to be able to do this with more than 200 to 400. When I left, we were in the 6 figures, going up to 200,000. Okay. When I started to talk to the General Bond, I said, look, I don't know how many people in the Pentagon know about this, but I can't have them all running around talking about it to each other, adding more people. Who knows about this? Well, he knew I was, you saw my picture. I was like 12 years old. And he said, he started laughing. He didn't know me that way. He said, well, Secretary of Defense, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Chief of Staff of the Air Force, Secretary of the Air Force, Deputy Undersecretary. He started listing them off. And I said, okay, I'm just writing it down. 10 days later, I came in and I said, okay, I got those. He said, you got what? I named off all the people he did. I said, I briefed them all, got them all signed up. You did what? I said, yeah, I went to see, it took me 1 day to get in to see the Secretary of Defense, Harold Brown. New to the office, 2 weeks. And I went to his secretary and said, I've got a piece of paper that he needs to sign. It's very classified. I just need to be in there for 5 minutes. And she must have thought I was her kid, because she liked me. And she said, I can get you in tomorrow. Gave me a time. She said, I'll give you 15 minutes. So I came back, sat in his lobby. She said, he's ready for you. So dumb me walks in like I do this every day. I walked in, I said, Mr. Secretary, I'm running security for that new program. And he said, well, I'm glad to see you. He said he was worried that nobody was doing that. He didn't care what I looked like or anything. He just figured he was happy to see me. So I had him sign up real quick. And he said, now you're going back to your same people. Yes, I am. There's 4 of us. He said, you tell them this is one that they don't up. He was very precise. And I said, I'll quote you. And then for some stupid reason, I stand there and say, Mr. Secretary, has anybody ever briefed you on the security of your office? And I am tap dancing like crazy. He said, why no? I said, like those big drapes that hang all the way to the floor. He said, yeah, I'm going to get rid of them. They're ugly. I said, no, sir, you shouldn't. They're part of your security. You go stand at that window, look across the Potomac. You're being filmed, photographed. Somebody's reading your lips. So if those things are closed, they're not going to do that. They're also sending a laser through that window, bouncing it off some of these pictures with glass. They can pick up some of your conversation with that. And I said, your equipment for your office that I see up here, it looks out of date. the Army Security Office takes care of your office. Do you want me to have them come do a complete upheaval and everything fixed and then brief you? Yeah, you take care of that, Bert. And I said, one more thing. When I was in your lobby, you've got all these magazines out there from aerospace companies that I assume you read them, stuff, pass it around to all of them, and they end up back on the table. I'm from Russia. I'm KGB or GRU military intelligence, and I'm up here visiting. I could read those things and see what you all think of every program, because you've all made comments. He said, again, and I said, your secretary is really good, isn't she? Yes, she is. How about you let us take care of that for you? Okay, we'll put Boy's Life out there, Ladies' Home Journal. And we took care of it. And as I went to leave, I said, I've got to come out and apologize. I've been here for an hour with you. And I got to apologize to her for taking, she said, you don't need to do that. She knows how I operate. And he said, Mr. Bird, before you leave, you ever need my name or the power of my office, you got it. That's what they said everywhere I went to except for one. Now, I needed intelligence. Well, that's a personal problem. But I did not want to go to DIA, CIA, all these people have to brief mid-level people, and I briefed hundreds of people on something that couldn't be briefed. So I got Bill Sampe, I got the Godfather. I said, you're my guy for the CIA, and I told him what it was. And I said, if you have to tell anybody, who's your boss? He said, Les Dirks, Deputy Director of CIA for Science and Technology. Give him a minimum and tell him he doesn't have to do anything, you're going to do it all. And then with my Air Force credentials, I could get to the FBI, and I went to the Deputy Director of the FBI for Foreign Counterintelligence. And I said, I need you for one of my advisors. And he said, well, my deputy's here too. I said, okay, if you're not here, I got two, but I want mostly you. He said, you got it. And then the guy that I was probably closest to, practically like a buddy, was the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, David Jones. He was a 4-star general. I could walk by his office. He said, Bird, get in here. And we would just chat. Well, he was getting a promotion. He was going to be chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And I said, well, I'm glad they finally listened to those letters I was writing. And he said, I got you to thank? I said, you bet your butt. And he was going out, and the new guy coming in was the former director of NSA, Lou Allen, Dr. Lou Allen. And he was the first PhD that was a chief of staff of the Air Force. And the other people weren't crazy about that idea. But I said, can you pass along that I need to see him? So I got a call from him. He said, come tomorrow at 2. So I went up to meet him. He said, he told me you were good. I could work with you easy. And I said, well, I need something. Do you know this new guy over at NSA, Bobby Inman, Admiral? Well, if he's Navy, he's good, right, Navy? He said, yeah, I know him well. I said, I need to meet with him. I want him to be my third. And he said, okay. And he arranged for him to come over at a certain time to a little meeting room to meet with me. Well, when they heard Bobby Inman was coming, he's a really, really smart man. About 8 or 9 more people showed up just to meet him. And he came in, and I'm sitting down at the end of the table. He said, when he came in, he didn't talk to me at all. They said, well, do you have any comments to make before we get started, Admiral? He said, yeah, I think the first thing we need to do is find some old grizzled colonel or a 1-star in Intel to run security on this damn thing. And I'm right there. It's kind of like you're trying to date somebody's daughter, and you say, you can do much better. He didn't say a thing. So I wrote him a note, passed it down to him, Captain Bird, to him. What's wrong with what I've been doing? He folded up, passed it back. He said, well, I don't think we should be talking about what I think we're going to be talking about in this room. Passed it down to him. 2 hours before you got here, this was a last-minute thought of mine, lucky. I had 2 tech agents from OSI come over and sweep the room, make sure there's no bugs. Over your right shoulder behind that door, they're filling the room with white noise until I say we're done. He passed it back. He said, all right, let's move on to something important. After everything over, he held back a little bit when it was just the two of us. And I said, oh, crap. So I walked up to him and he said, here's my aide. He knows where I'm at all times. Here's my secure phone at the office. Here's my secure phone next to my bed, which I used twice. He said, I'll be your third. So I had CIA, FBI, and NSA. I had 3 people that got me anything I needed. My fingerprints weren't on any request. Air Force, the program, on nothing. They got the stuff and they gave it to me. And that's all I needed. I had certain rules. If the Navy, if the CIA gave me something that I thought the FBI could use, I could not give it to the FBI. I had to hold back and ask them to give it to them and leave it up to them. The intel people don't always get along. They fight because they're fighting for the funds. They don't want you to have more money than this guy. But when I had my first meeting with the 3 of them, a couple of them said, how'd you pick us? I said, I want the biggest bang for my buck. Why did I screw up? He said, we're an old boy network. We have worked together casually and trust each other and have worked, so you did good.
Was that good?
What's that?
Was that good?
Yes.
Okay.
That was wonderful
Okay, thank you.
because they liked each other and they were happy to work with each other. A couple of times, like one time, there's something got out and I had to go over to the CIA because the Godfather called me, and apparently something got out that I was knowledgeable about. And they didn't know if I leaked it out. So I went up to the level where the assistant for the head of the CIA was there, and he asked me if I knew about that information. I said, I know a little bit about it. He said, did you give it to anybody else? I said, I'm not stupid. I've got an arrangement, and I would never give up that arrangement. I have the best resources for intel. So no, I didn't, but I glanced back. The Godfather's hand was shaking. First time I ever saw him scared. But it worked beautifully. Some of the stuff I did a lot for Dr. Perry. I ended up doing about 40% of my work for him. One of the things I did was security liaison to 6 congressional committee chairmen. And then I did other projects for him. And all of a sudden, we had a new guy that moved in down the hall from me. He was a Lieutenant General, Thomas Stafford. Astronaut on 4 missions, including Apollo Soyuz, where he had to pretend like he liked the Russians. The one where they went around the moon, separated, and he flew 7 miles around with his partner and then rejoined to show that they could do it. And I said, why didn't you just go, oops, and land? He said, well, our thing wasn't set up to be able to land. And we also didn't have the capability to take off. And I said, so they were willing to sacrifice you? He said, I guess so, but that's okay, that's my job. But he had 4 missions. They are as smart as they appear to be. And I asked him if he would simply be one of my advisors. And I started to brief him. He said, I already know. I worked on XST, which was before the Have Blue. And he also went to Northrop and heard that they were trying to build a bomber. He wrote on a napkin, here's what the mileage should be with unfueled, refueled. Here's what it should be able to carry. So he was way ahead. And sometimes he would work frequently with Dr. Perry. We got a call one day that they were requested to come over on a Sunday afternoon to Congress in front of a committee. Dr. Perry, and they said, bring General Stafford along. He said, I'm kind of scared they're going to want to talk about something, maybe a rumor about stealth. Can you find out what they're doing? So I called one of the committee chairmen that I knew. He said, Bob, don't worry. You tell that astronaut to bring pictures, to bring trinkets to give to them. They'll all turn into little boys. So I told him, I said, don't worry. And he called me Monday. He said, right on. By this time, I'd been on the programs for a year by myself. And I was having to travel. I had 122 companies. I had Test bases, obviously I went to Area 51 because that's where we did our testing. I had a lot of people to keep in trust with. I needed help.
What year was this?
70, I started in June 76. And so this was around May of 77. And I called OSI and I said, I need some help. I need somebody at the Pentagon. I need another guy that I could put out the Skunk Works, because that's where a lot of my problems were. So Captain Hartford, John Hartford, came over. He had a very fast mind. I'm trying to figure out why they gave me those two, if they were really good or, you know, they were like the former quarterback that we got from Seattle. And he came over, he had a really fast mind, and eventually he took over when I left all my duties and did them well. He became an expert on the intelligence community. And after about a year, Dr. Perry said, I want you to come work directly for me. And he did, and then eventually he went to the CIA. So it was a real help to have Hartford with me. Ken Hassan had come from the Air Force Academy. And down there they have that really nice chapel, Jewish synagogue, Catholic church, and Protestant. They didn't have anywhere from Ken. He was a Muslim from Lebanon ancestry. And I liked him because his soul was strong. He was very patriotic. And he had a wife and a child. Good dad, good father. I was worried when I put him out at the Skunk Works that he was not going to be well received and he was going to have a lot of fighting. Didn't bother him at all because he was also the halfback on the football team. Nobody was going to mess with Ken. Well, I needed to put him out there. And on TV, they say, well, let's put him undercover. That doesn't work because there's too many people you have to lie to. So I talked to the Godfather, and he said, well, you know Ernie out there, don't you? I said, yeah. He's the last CIA guy that's in that building. He has specialized communication that he has to take care of. Why don't you talk to him? So I talked to Ernie. He said, hell, have him come in and share my office. I got room. So he did. And he was able to, he said, not only will I be able to give him a sanctuary, but I know the company for 12 years. I can tell him everything, where things are hidden and all that. And it was great. But when Ken started to go out there, he said, Bob, I don't mean to be ungrateful. What the hell am I going to do for 8 hours a day? I said, walk around. You'll find stuff. He went out to the city dump and he found that they were not totally burning things that they should have burned. There were people working on our new programs that were only cleared for old programs. He just stumbled over everything. And the people back in our office were enamored with the Skunk Works. They thought they were wonderful. They were technically, engineering-wise, production-wise, not security. I knew it because the arms of the CIA had gone away from them. And even one time, Ben said, well, I want to go out. We're not getting our background checks done fast enough. I'm going to have our security guards go out and do background checks. He said, they can't do that. He said, well, they used to. He said, those weren't your security guards. They had credentials, fake credentials. So they were allowed to do that. I'll come back to this one at the bottom. Keep in mind those two words, because I'm going to have you yell them out. Okay, there's our astronaut. He passed away last year. He was in his 90s. And I always tried to go find these people after I retired. Like the guy that was my professor of aerospace science, after I retired, I found where he was. I wrote him a 1.5-page letter, said, if you didn't get me back in the program, I wouldn't have done all this. I got a letter from his wife about a month or two later, said he died 3 weeks after he got the letter, and the letter made him cry. So I also went back to see him later, and I hadn't seen him for over 15 years, and he was working for a real expensive watch company down in Denver. He made a visit. Come see the astronaut. So I walked in a building. As soon as he saw me, he said, Bob, what are you doing here? I said, I'd like to have a free watch. And he said, yeah, I'll give you mine. It's a Timex. But he remembered me. He's just a fantastic guy. Okay. So Ken out there heard about a coffee cup that said "Have Blue." And you know what that is, the predecessor for the F-117. You think that was important? Yeah. And there was a cloud on the cup, and a thing pointing out from the cloud like this, like the nose of an airplane, a jet. And when you poured something in, the cloud disappears, and you could see sort of the rest, and it was obviously the Have Blue. So he said, well, of course they make that in-house. And then he said, no, they didn't. So he went downtown Burbank to a ceramic store down there where anybody could walk in. He said, I want one of those cups where the cloud disappears. Well, you can't have it because they said it was a big secret. Of course. And they didn't exactly have all the clearances and accesses. So here they are, one of the biggest secrets in America, and they're taking care of it. So he said, well, I have Lockheed credentials. Oh, how many do you want? You've got 3 of them. Kept one, sent me 2 overnight. So the next morning, with my fighter pilots, I put those down. They said, cool. And then I poured the coffee in there, and cloud disappeared. They said, really good. You know where I got them? Ken got them at a downtown store where they said this was a big secret. And they looked at me and they said, they put together, said, all that stuff you wanted to do, go get them. So they finally realized what was going on.
Can you tell,
Yes, ma'am.
with radar and laser, what was the importance of disappearing? Because he would know they were there anyway.
No. If all the radar never comes back to the radar unit, they aren't seeing anything. So the airplane, as you'll see it, it's faceted. There's a bunch of flat surfaces. And anything hitting that bounced away from rather than going straight back to radar. So theoretically, we would be down at the level of birds or small birds or something where they couldn't tell it was an airplane. A B-52 looks like 100,000 square yards. Big, really big. Got it? Yeah, ask anything. Okay, so I wanted to tighten up the background checks. If you got a secret clearance, they would do a background investigation. If you got a top secret, they would do a special background investigation. And that's one where people actually go out and talk to people. It's much better. So I went to the DIS, Defense Investigative Service, and I said, I have a need for a special category. I want everybody I send in to get an SBI, even if they're only getting a secret clearance. And they said, well, I don't know how we'd mark that down. I said, how about making a circle with an A in the middle? Anytime they see that, they know that means SBI. So everybody in our program is going to be able to get a special background check. And then I went out to where the adjudicators are for the Defense Industrial Security Clearance Office. And I personally trained the adjudicators, what I wanted them to look for. And if they got any hits, I didn't do anything. I didn't have time. I have somebody in the FBI, people in CIA that take care of that. Give it to them. I'm a certified fraud examiner. I really got interested in fraud cases. So I was concerned that if we got fraud in this case, it would come out in the papers and everybody would have something to look at. So I found a group of fraud auditors from another agency that were really, really good. So I co-opted them, and they said, how many will this be? Well, at DIS, they said, how many too? And I said, oh, a couple 100,000. And the auditors, they said, how many? I said, well, if you need more people, because they said, we're maxed out, I'll get you more people, but I want you guys to run it. Because I had one GAO thing that was done, and they started with the U-2, and then they got up to the SR-71, and I knew it was a congressman from Michigan. He was trying to embarrass us. And I managed it. They wouldn't give me the final result, but I got it from one of the committee chairmen. said the program was gold-plated but well-run. They didn't want to tell us that we were good. Okay. As I was running around the country, I kept running into other problems. Air traffic controllers are trained in Kansas City for a year. And then when they leave, they're allowed to pick a city or somewhere in America to train for 2 years. And I said, show me where you're sending them, where they choose. I said, my God, you're sending them to 10 of the 11 places where we deploy our B-52s in case of war. You're also letting them go where they can manage and overlook Area 51 and all the flying there. I said, Mr. Byrd, I don't know what's classified. Where do you want us to send them? I said, Harlingen, Texas. If you think of the state of Texas, that thing way at the bottom where it comes to a point, that's Harlingen. It's where the Confederate Air Force works on their B-25s. And he was aware of it. He said, there's nothing down there. Who'd want to be there? I said, it's up to them. If they want to go home, that's fine. So we worked a deal where we started to give them places where we wouldn't mind them having people go, especially from the bad companies. And we've kept that up. We were taking the Have Blue to White Sands. And the reason we were taking it there, we were driving it in a semi all the way down there. And I rode in the truck with the guy when we checked the area, the whole route all the way from Los Angeles down there. And it was a Holloman Air Force Base. They would drive up and then turn left and go back to White Sands. First of all, I had the FBI do a whole series of checks around that area. And among other things, they found that right outside of White Sands in the city, there's a university, and they had a visiting Russian professor. Had 2 PhDs. One of them was in radar technology. Oh, that couldn't be a coincidence. So anyhow, they did that, and then the other thing I did when I went out there, I looked at this, I talked to the people at the White Sands. It's called a radar backscatter facility. That's where they're going to measure the RCS, radar cross-section of Have Blue. I said, you're out here in the middle of nothing. Don't wetbacks come over here to get a drink of water and stuff? Yeah, they do. What do you do with them? Oh, they take them back over to El Paso and put them on a bus, take them back to Mexico. I said, do they photograph them, fingerprint them? I don't think so. But there's a new thing called the El Paso Intelligence Center. So I visited them, and I asked them what they did. Yeah, we just put them on a bus. I said, I'm a big shot intelligence guy from the Pentagon. I was from the Pentagon. That always scares people. I said, I would like you to photograph them, fingerprint them, and do a basic interview. When they did that, they found East Germans, North Koreans, Chinese, and Russians, posing as wetbacks to get a free ride to Mexico where they could fly back home. Other things that we did, well, we did go to Epic. There we are on the pole at White Sands. And when we went there, I knew there was a civilian in charge of security at Holloman Air Force Base, and he was a stickler. But all the way down in the truck, we were looking for things like, he was looking for overpasses, could he fit? I was looking for, where's the nearest air base? Where can I get police? Where can I get military in case we have a problem? And who's going to want to open up the back of our truck when I tell them they can't? So after that, when we took the real thing down there, I went out ahead of us. I had 2 carloads of agents running shotgun because we were bringing that down and nobody was going to open the truck. The first night we had to stay out all night. They had a prison break down on the highway. Some guy and his 2 sons were trying to break him out. So there was all kinds of activity there. But anyhow, I got there first to the guy that was on the gate. And it was a kid that was no more than 18. And I walked up to him, and I wasn't exactly dressed appropriate. I had shorts on, a mesh T-shirt. My hair was long, down over my collar, and I had a gun in my paper bag. And I showed him I was an officer. I said, there's going to be a semi come through here. You're just going to wave him through. And he looked at me kind of funny, and then I showed him I was also a special agent. I said, it's classified. You're going to wave him through. We're going to go down to White Sands. We'll be out of your hair in just a couple seconds. He looked and looked. Okay. I was almost kissed him, but I'd lost my clearance if I had. So the truck came through and everybody came through and we went over there. And the guy set up, and that was a wooden model. And they put it up there and the guys inside said, okay, we've got everything turned on, go ahead. It's up. No, put it up. Let's get out of here. It's up. Hell it is. Walked outside, said, holy crap. We couldn't see it. I mean, they may have seen something, but it certainly didn't look like an airplane. So they went, oh, my goodness. So that was a good indicator.
Bird,
Yes,
you're at 1 hour.
thank you. I'll zip through as quick as I can. Admiral Inman got me in an office one time and he said, I'm concerned about Long Beach, California, Russian ships that come in. And he said, I'm worried that they could be spying on all those air companies out there. He said, I know what to look for, but I don't know how to get on the boat. I said, I do. We train all the Coast Guard investigators. They owe me. I'm going to have a senior person from the Coast Guard come and talk to you, and you guys work it out. So not too long after that, there were a bunch of coasties got on the ship, and a couple of them, their uniforms didn't fit because they were from NSA. And they went around and they found in a wastebasket the communication frequencies for every company that was out there. So he was right, they were spying. And then when the ship left, went up to Alaska, the entire crew had been changed or thrown overboard. So when he did that, I had an idea. I said, I'm going to expand that whole thing to the United States. I'm going to cover 64 ports, and the Navy, everybody else is going to tell me how far they think people can listen in. It was 200 to 600 miles. And I'm looking at Aeroflot, because we caught Aeroflot with communication racks and things to look at on the one side of the airplane, a commercial one in the back. And they'd fly so they could get their best coverage. And there were trains, I'll cover the trains in a minute, all kinds of things. And when I put it all together, there was a little area in the middle of Missouri, and there was an air reserve base there, but it was too tiny for anything. But down the road was Whiteman Air Force Base, and that was a big place. When the B-2 was actually built, this was way early, the B-2 was built, that's where they put it. We had a lot to do with that. Jack Northrop, you remember, that's him. He was at Northrop and he designed the flying wing near the end of the World War II. Anybody ever see one of those? He originally designed it with props, turboprops backwards. But then he also put jet engines on it. And it flew pretty good, but when they first started to fly it, the first test pilot, they have to put it in a stall to see how it would perform and how they recover. As soon as they did that, the plane went, oop. That didn't work out. The plane went down, killed everybody. The next test pilot figured out how to handle it, and he was able to do that. Well, that's the YB-47. That was a predecessor to the B-2, and it didn't work. They also had one that was hexagonal tube with mirrors on the side. That didn't work. So some wizard said, why don't we go look at that thing that Jack Northrop designed? Within an inch, that's the dimensions of the B-2. And that flies good. And the test pilot that learned how to handle it on a stall came and talked to the test pilots for this. And he said, I can tell you how to keep it from stalling. He said, it doesn't stall. What do you mean? It won't let us. It's got 12 computers running it. But I got a call from the program manager out there, and they really hadn't had everything totally built. But he said, Bob, Jack Northrop is within about a month of dying. Can I? I said, yes. So you didn't let me finish. You want to show him his baby? Yeah. Well, don't you want to be out here? I don't want to be out there. Get him in there before he dies. So apparently there's a picture. They opened up this, there's his baby. Only now it's jet engine, run with computers. It's beautiful. And I got tears coming down his eyes. That was fun. Okay, Plant 42. I may have about 10 minutes. If anybody gets bored, leave. I'll do quick as I can. Plant 42 up in Palmdale. Big square building with a diagonal wall. One side was U2, one side was the SR-71. The wall in there was not one wall, it was two. They had 7 A-12s in there, parked head to head like this. And the test pilot for the SR-71, he and I were buddies. He was telling me how brave somebody was. And I said, well, what happened? He said, well, they put a long tail on my plane, and when I rotated, they hadn't figured on it. It scraped, caught on fire. And he's flying around. He said, Tower, am I on fire? And the lady over there said, that's affirmative. I said, that's your story? You were on fire, you idiot. He said, yeah, but I'm trained with that. She was just so calm. He told me that they were going to bring those airplanes out and either scrap them or put them in the boneyard. Well, I knew about the boneyard. It's a dry place down there where they have it. Because there was one guy already up at Plant 42 that had no means of support, but he was often photographing things around there, including the shuttle, our stuff, and everything. So the FBI followed him down to the boneyard, and he got some second lieutenant to pull the thing off of a drone, the D-21, and got that. So we were concerned about him. But Pew and I looked at each other. I tried to get somebody else to do the case, and they said, who'd be interested in an old airplane? So I just turned to the FBI and CIA and said, you guys want to catch the spy? They said, sure. Because I knew that the last thing that the Russians would do once they saw that on satellites, they would have to always send a guy in to verify it personally. So they got both those guys. I don't think they arrested him. They followed him home to see who they contacted and got a lot more information. While I was waiting, I got a call from my deputy back in the Pentagon. He said, I got a high-level request. They want you to go over to the nearby place where they're retiling the shuttle and evaluate the security on the shuttle. I said, do you want me to do that over my lunch hour, or can I have a sandwich? Another little project. I'm waiting to go from the road across the railroad tracks to go see it. And the security was good. But all these things came by, sealed boxcars, sealed. And on the lower right was a dancing Cossack. Now that's not Ireland. So I couldn't figure out if a dancing sealed thing could have a human in there, that could have tactical nukes, could have electronics. And so I knew a guy back at OSI who loved to ride trains. So I said, I need him for 3 months. He said, there are thousands of those traveling all across our stuff. He said, when they take a train off to put on another train, they have to pay rent. How long do you think they'd leave one there? I'd say 4 hours. He said, 30 days. Where's that? Right outside SAC headquarters. So I called the commander of SAC and I said, tell your security police about this. And then I left it to the FBI and the CIA to finish. I went out I heard that the Chinese had visited the Skunk Works, and I didn't know about it. I don't mean the Taiwanese, the Chinese. So I went out there and they said, well, we didn't let them in our real sensitive place. But I went out and talked to the security guards because they all liked me. And I said, anything go funny? They said, well, they had funny shoes on. Foamy ones. Then when they got back in the car, they took their shoes off and put them in bags. They were looking for metal filings, see if we were working on something. The biggest thing for this whole thing is the people that were briefed all kept their word. The only time we caught somebody is when something different went by, and we were so ready, we grabbed them real quick. And that's what ended up. From the Have Blue, you see the vertical stabilizers in the back? They made those longer. It made it fly better. I had other problems because one of the pieces on there came from a company that was owned by a woman in South America and a guy in Belgium. So I had to figure a way to carve them out and still buy the part. The titanium we all got from Russia. We did. And that was for the SR and all that stuff through a bunch of other companies. Thank you, Russia. And that's got pieces in it like from an F-14 and stuff, like an ejection seat. And we had a crash one time because the guy had to eject, broke both of his legs. He was out at Area 51, and a two-star got in the helicopter and rode into the hospital with him. And I told our guys, somebody's got to tell that general he screwed up. And they always just turn to me, yeah, somebody has to do it, Bert. He said, well, I had to make sure he got hit. I said, why were you on the helicopter? When we went, I got my shirt. I don't know if you can see my shirt. I got that at the first meeting of the Stealth Fighter Association. And either General Schwarzkopf or his deputy were there, and they said they didn't know how good the stuff would be. 1,200 sorties plus, not a scratch on any of our planes, destroyed 40% of the targets. And the guys, even the pilots, as they went in, there's a radar that sticks out. They pulled it in, turned off their communication. They were flying alone, unarmed, and unafraid, hoping like hell. And by the time they got in, dropped their bombs, turned around, they had to look in the rearview mirror. They were shooting things up. They didn't know where we were. We destroyed all their radar and the communication. So after that, you could fly a Piper Cub in there and they wouldn't know you.
So is there only a pilot in that plane?
Yep.
Okay.
There's a show called Executive Decision, and it shows 9 people in there for Hollywood. And that's me when I was about 11 years old. 50 years ago, I was much younger. And the reason I needed to go back to the Air Force is nobody could say what I did, but when I left, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force gave me a Legion of Merit. I didn't know that was a big deal for a brand new major. And the astronaut gave me a half page, and General Slay gave me half a page. I got whatever I wanted for an assignment. Done.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have time for a few more questions if you have any right now. Cool.
And I gotta thank my wife back there. That's her face over here. She's the one that convinced me to start saving information, and she has roses for the ladies. Yes, sir.
How can they let you retire?
Which one?
I said, how can they let you retire? You know so much.
What I know stayed secret for a long, long time. Oh, what I was going to tell you folks, I left that, and my position was filled with OSI agents continually to the present day, and the present day guy and his historian interviewed me in a skiff. I talked for 7 hours. He is a civilian equivalent to a brigadier general, has 500 agents working for him. I had just a few. So they're doing good work. I don't know what they're doing. I'm not asking.
Well, Bob, thank you so much
thank
for
you.
joining
I
us.
appreciate it.
Just one of our challenge cards.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have magazines.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed this.
Happy Valentine's Day.
And Bob has copies of your flyer, I think, right here, in case you'd like to come visit him.
Yeah, I should tell you that if you would like to see the collection, I'm open all the time, and I live in North Glen, that's not very far from here. And just call me. And
24/7.
the museum is open and all the time, and will be open as soon as I get home. So if anybody wants to come by this
It sounds like,
afternoon,
my name is
just give
Jim.
me a call.
It sounds like you discovered a lot of